Have you ever wondered if a raw attack build or a crit build would be better on Jean? Well, look no further. My name is Braxophone, and we are going to be discussing just that today. Just to preface, this is a physical damage focused video. We won't be dealing with elemental damage at all, but don't you worry, we will be getting to that really soon. I just need to collect a couple more artifacts so that way I can get the best data and representation on the elemental builds. So let's get right into it. First, we're going to talk about the difference between building raw attack percent and physical damage and building crit rate and crit damage. The idea of an attack percent physical damage build is just that every attack you do is going to do a lot of damage. You're building attack as high as you can so that way you can kind of just shred through anything with that one character. The idea behind crit builds is that you have a slightly lower attack, but you are consistently hitting crits, which just mean you do a bunch of bonus damage, and usually you can actually get a higher number if you build the crit rate and the attack percent right in conjunction. There's a lot of characters that can benefit from a crit build. We know that Catching thrives on crit and electro damage. We know Diluc can be built crit because he has a high crit rate by default. We know that whenever you see a 100k Barbara hit, it's because it's a crit build combined with a bunch of other supports. But the basic idea is that you just try to hit that crit as often as possible. So when testing today, I tested two main sets. The first set I tested was attack percent 4-piece Gladiator, with one of my artifacts having physical damage up, just for the extra damage. And I didn't have another attack percent artifact. The second set I tested was 2-piece Berserker, 2-piece Gladiator. That way you can get the Gladiator attack bonus, but you also get the crit rate bonus from Berserker. I'll tell you right now, 4-piece Berserker with Jean is god-awful, and the reason for that is because she heals so much. There's almost never a time where you're going to be sitting below 70% health for a fight. When testing DPS for both sets, I tested 12-second strings of attacks, always trying for the max DPS combo discussed in my Jean guide, and during the totality of the 12 seconds, Rancor's buff would always be maxed. For both DPS averages, I tested two different strings and took the average DPS of both to find the average of the averages, because 12 seconds isn't really a long time, but a fight will rarely last 12 seconds in this game if you build it right. The specific stats I went for on the 2-piece Berserker and 2-piece Gladiator in this order was crit rate up until about 40%, which we didn't actually get to hit because my artifacts are not that good, crit damage, and then attack percent where applicable. You want to make sure crit rate and crit damage are your priority in a crit build, because crit rate scales how many times you're going to get crits, and crit damage scales really hard, so when you hit a crit you do a ton of bonus damage. Think of it this way, you can build attack percent to 50% higher for a really buff normal attack, but by default crit damage is 50%, so you could also put that same 50% into crit damage and it would be 100% bonus instead of the normal 50% you would have. It's all theoretical, but that's just why we prioritize those stats. So on to the results. The first time when I was testing the 2-piece Berserker 2-piece Gladiator set, over the span of 12 seconds we did pull a DPS of 613.5. On the second string, we got a DPS of 568.1, and averaging those two out, we get a total of 590.8 DPS. Keep in mind the stats that I showed a little bit earlier, my crit rate is almost 40% and my crit damage is still 50%. This means that my build is not very optimized, however, this is a fairly low number. Moving on to the 4-piece set, here I went all attack percent and one physical damage item. Needless to say, my attack was a little bit higher in this build than the previous one, and you can see that on my stats. The first string of attacks yielded me a 730 damage per second average over 12 seconds. Funny enough, I hit some crits on the second string and I got a DPS of 778.3 over 12 seconds. The average of these two strings is 754.2 DPS. This means in our trials, we got about 160 more DPS on average for the just physical and attack percent build, which would make the 4-piece Gladiator set better for Jean than the crit build we were running. Let's talk about the why. We've already previously mentioned this, but it is really hard to find consistency in DPS in a crit build because the nature of the game is that fights are short and crits are a random proc. That's why the golden rule is don't build crit unless you have a 40% crit rate. That was probably one of my mistakes here, is that I didn't actually get to the 40% crit rate. That being said, we were very close, and it does seem like, generally speaking, Gladiator set is going to be better for Jean because it allows her to have that extremely high physical damage. Jean's base crit rate isn't very high, mine's like 9.7%, and I'm level 69, and I have some artifacts with crit rate in their substats, so it makes sense that she wouldn't be hitting crits that consistently. This is different from a character like Ketching or Diluc, where they actually have pretty high standard crit rate. But in addition to Jean's crit rate just not being that high, and on top of that the Gladiator set just being better for damage output, we also have to consider Jean's passive healing. Like I said, the 4-piece Berserker set isn't worth it because Jean passively heals. Something to keep in mind is that you can't crit heals. Every hit you do is going to yield the same amount of healing for Jean. Which means, based on this test, that not only is the Gladiator 4-piece set better for Jean's physical DPS, but it also increases her healing output, which makes her a better teammate. There are a couple ways you guys can improve this crit build though, and make your Jean capable of being a solid crit build. Let's talk about those. Typically, crit builds are burst windows. Jean doesn't have a lot of burst outside of her E ability, but you can use the 4-star sword, the Flute, to give her more burst damage. Alternatively, if you're Battle Pass 30 and you haven't chosen your weapon yet, the Black Sword from the Battle Pass has its base stat as crit rate, so you could pseudo-force Jean's crit rate to be high by using that weapon, and it would allow you to self-heal more as a result. Again, keeping in mind that you would lose out on the Rancor physical damage buff, which also gives you more healing, so it's a trade-off. But anyways, that is about it for this video. I want to thank you all again for your continued support. We're growing super fast, and I'm always surprised when I log into YouTube and see my sub counts increased. I know I'm shooting for the stars here, but I want to eventually push to 500. So if you've enjoyed, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more Genshin Impact content, and there will be a support and elemental damage build video coming soon. Anyways, see ya.